Let me tell you why optional is my new favorite feature in C++. Let's imagine a scenario where you need to find the index of the largest element in an array. So if we, for example, take this array, we want to create a function that returns 1. The simplest approach I can come up with is probably a for loop like this, which returns the index in the end. And just for testing, we can also print it. But now there is a problem. What if the array we entered does not have any elements? What will then happen? Well, in this case, it will just return a 0. And, well, that will cause a problem, right? Because if we print the index of 0, our program crashes. This is fine in this simple scenario, but imagine this being deployed on maybe health equipment or anything else that needs to run 24/7. Situations like this is just not acceptable. In our really simple case here, we could of course just, for example, change this to a -1, and then outside the function, check for whether it is -1, and if it isn't, then we print it. However, this introduces a whole new set of problems. Let's imagine a scenario where you want to use a library for loading in an image, maybe showing it on the screen. And whoever made this library made it using a similar approach. So let's say you wanted to load in an image using a file path. What if you made a spelling mistake and this function fails to give you an image back? And then later in the code, when you want to read that image, it crashes. Here, like with the array scenario, we could of course put some kind of check-in or a -1 in the image itself. However, I would argue that this is quite unintuitive for most people using a library like this, and this would be changing from each library to another, making it again more difficult for the user. A common solution to this that I have seen is to have the functions return a boolean, telling whether or not the function was successful or not. And then instead have the image or vector that you would like to get be part of the function's input parameters, but with a reference. This way, you automatically get a boolean saying whether or not this was successful that you always can check. But this approach I still don't think is super great. I personally don't find it super intuitive, and when reading through implementation and header files, if the documentation isn't good or the naming isn't easy to understand, it can actually be quite difficult to figure out that this is how the function is supposed to be used. So what is the solution for this? Optional. If you ever try programming Rust, you'll see this concept everywhere with the result and options enum, which effectively does the same. And I love it. The idea here is that instead of returning the result of the function itself, we wrap it inside this optional. So if we take our array example, instead of returning the integer by itself, the integer is wrapped inside this optional class, which is a template. Or the optional doesn't contain a value at all. And now the user of this function is forced to deal with this optional before they get access to the integer. And this is universal for all functions that return an optional. Now, if you want to, you can just use .value and get the value itself, and basically do what we already were doing. But now the output of the function, by its very nature, has a boolean telling whether or not there actually is a value, and that you can check first. And now as well, the user of this function automatically gets a warning that something returned can potentially cause problems or crashes if not handled correctly. And this is why optional is my new favorite feature in C++, and why it most likely is going to be very prevalent in code I write going forward. But yeah, I hope you found this interesting. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.